This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening. My name is Susan Maggiato. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the River Towns. I'd like to welcome you and our candidates to this candidates forum for the 92nd Assembly District General Election. This forum will give you the opportunity to hear the candidates' views about the significant issues that affect our community. This will help you to make an informed decision when you vote in the November elections. I'd like to begin by saying how pleased we are to partner with Disability Rights New York to provide live closed captioning in Spanish and English, as well as American Sign Language interpretation. To see the closed captions, go to the box that says closed captions on the bottom, and there's an up arrow next to it. If you hit the up arrow, it will activate the closed captions for you. Alternatively, you can go to the website that you see in the box on the screen, www.streamtext.net/player?event=DRNY. And you see it up on the panel. There you can view the captions in stream text in your web browser, and also you will be able to see the captions in both English and Spanish. Welcome to our candidates, Mary Jane Shimsky and Carlo Valente. Our moderator tonight is Alice Tenney. Alice is a member of the Larchmont Mamaroneck League and a resident of Mamaroneck. Our timekeeper is Ryan Tribal, a student at Horace Greeley and a student member of the League of Women Voters of New Rochelle. I'd also like to introduce Sophia Chowdry. Sophia is a junior at Briarcliff Manor High School and a student member of our own River Towns League. Sophia is going to provide introductory remarks for us. So now I'll turn it over to Sophia.
Thank you. Since 1920, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. The League does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. The League is fully committed to ensure compliance, in principle and in practice, with the national organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Membership is open to everyone 16 years of age or older. Since I was 13, witnessing the effects of a democracy in breakdown, I knew that voting was the key to creating the future I wanted to live in. My mom and I joined the League of Women Voters, and I began to volunteer at voter registration drives and Vote Like a Girl, an annual historical festival on women's rights to participate in our democracy. When I read about the harmful decisions that legislators make that represent the views of a strong-willed minority, like the restriction of our reproductive freedoms or inaction on climate change, it reminds me that if everyone voted, we would be able to take monumental action on things that matter. As the 2022 midterms approach, I feel more and more confident that the people, specifically young people, will show up to the polls thanks to the help of organizations like the League of Women Voters. I am proud to work with the League, and I ask that the candidates here tonight will too keep in mind the inclusion of young voices if elected. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. A word about our recording policy that both candidates have agreed to. Only the entities authorized by the League may record or live stream this forum, and only licensed media, including TV, radio, and newspapers, are entitled by FCC regulations to air portions of the recording. Anyone else who broadcasts or streams it must do so in its entirety. This is to ensure that the content of the forum will not be manipulated in any way to create false or misleading impressions of any candidate. The forum will be recorded and available for later viewing. There will be links on the River Towns League website and Facebook page to the location on YouTube. Finally, one more word about the bond referendum. During this election, New Yorkers will have the opportunity to vote on proposal number 1, the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act of 2022. This ballot measure will provide funding to safeguard drinking water, update New York's infrastructure, conserve wildlife habitat, and strengthen New York's economy. The League urges you to flip over your ballot. You have to flip it over in order to vote for this. So flip it over and vote yes on proposal number 1, the Environmental Bond Act. Having said that, I will now turn the forum over to our moderator, Alice Tenney.
Good evening, and thank you, Susan. So I am Alice Tenney. I'll be tonight's moderator. And as Susan mentioned, I'm not a voter in this district. So as the League requires, I'm completely nonpartisan in this contest. Tonight's forum will follow the League's traditional format, beginning with an opening statement from each candidate, followed by a question and response period, and finishing up with closing statements from each candidate. The order of the candidates' opening statements has been determined by lot. The reverse order will be used for the closing statements. Opening and closing statements should not exceed 1 minute. Audience questions have been collected by email prior to tonight's forum. A committee of League members has reviewed and sorted the questions, keeping in mind the relevance to the office and the specifics of the race. I will address each question to each candidate, after which the candidate may take up to 1.5 minutes to respond. Our trusty timekeeper will be visible on the screen and will alert us, meaning the moderator and the candidate, when 30 seconds of response time are remaining, and then again when it is time to stop. The candidate will be allowed to finish a sentence once he or she has started. Candidates are each allowed 2 rebuttals over the course of the evening, and rebuttal time is limited to 30 seconds. There will be no responses to rebuttals. After closing statements, I reserve the right to grant a rebuttal, if it is deemed necessary. And then a couple of final notes. The candidates will not interrupt each other or the moderator during the forum. And as the moderator, I reserve the right to pause or, if necessary, halt the proceedings to enforce the ground rules and the format. Please note that the candidates have not been provided with any of the questions ahead of time. So finally, except for time limits as stated, the only restriction on candidate statements and answers is respect and civility. And with that, we will begin with an opening statement from Mr. Valente.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for setting up this debate. For those who do not know me, my name is Carlo Valente. I'm the Republican and conservative candidate for New York State Assembly District 92. I've decided to run for this office because of what New York State and this district has become. Over the past decade, and especially these past 2 years, New York has been in decline. So much so that many New Yorkers have left the state. Since 2010, New York has lost over 1 million residents. Top 3 reasons: crime, high taxes, and political corruption. We have a one-party system in Albany that has lost its way, and we, the citizens of New York, are the ones suffering. I'm not beholden to anyone. I don't owe any favors to special interest groups. I'm a citizen candidate. I'm here to fight for our community and challenge Albany.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky.
Thank you to the League and to our signer and our closed captioner for making this debate accessible to all of our listeners. I'm Mary Jane Shimsky. I'm a Scranton, Pennsylvania native. I chose to live in New York because it's such a wonderful state. I've spent the last 10 years on the County Board of Legislators, where we've done so much work to improve our infrastructure, improve our public health, our community mental health, our cultural offerings. We can do so much to make this state even more outstanding than it is. The last 2 years have been hard on the entire world and the entire country. We've been very fortunate that because of democratic policies, we've taken a more aggressive stance toward COVID, which ended up saving many, many lives. We've taken an aggressive stance on guns, which has made our state one of the states with the lowest murder rates in this country. Please, let's move forward with our democratic values. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. So our first question will go to Mr. Valente first. If elected, you will represent the interests of the voters of the 92nd election district. What do you think are the most pressing issues facing the district, and what uniquely qualifies you to tackle them?
Well, in my opening statement, as I said, there are three major reasons why New York State has been in decline. And it's been because of the one-party rule that's been in Albany for at least the past 10 years. Crime with cashless bail is out of control. We also have a one-party system that has led us down a path that is going to be very hard to come back from. And then the cost of living in New York has driven out hundreds of thousands, close to probably 100,000 this past year. And the party that's ruled in Albany has lost its way. They're basically drunk with power, and the voices of the citizens aren't being heard. We have a problem with closed primaries that do not allow independents and unaffiliated to vote. If we had them voting, we would have a bigger voice. And Albany has decided to have closed primaries. So high crime, the cost, and the one-party rule in Albany are the major reasons that need to be changed in New York and in this district.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky, would you like me to repeat the question? Oh, you're on mute.
I think I've got it.
Okay.
Okay. The challenges we face are, number one, the high cost of housing. This is a problem in states which are very attractive for people to live. We're not the only one with this problem, but we need creative solutions, and we need to work with New York City because we are experiencing the same housing affordability problems that the city is. Climate change. Hurricane Ida resulted in dramatic rescues, some deaths in Westchester County, and broken infrastructure. To protect people's homes, businesses, and lives, we need to move more quickly toward a carbon-free future. The other thing that will do is it will take down the cost of living because we'll no longer be dependent on places like Saudi Arabia and Russia, who play around with our economy by creating price spikes when they feel it's a good idea. Public health, we need to be ready for the next pandemic. Climate change is going to result in more pandemics over time. Masks, vaccines, science. I stand for facts and science on these matters, and we need to follow the facts and science to protect our public health. Crime is down in Westchester County by approximately 20%, based on the 8 index crimes that the FBI tracks. One problem we are going to have with crime is the Supreme Court is trying to put guns all over the place awash on our streets. We have to work with law enforcement and the courts to prevent that.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky, the next question will go to you first. A woman's right to abortion is protected in the state of New York. If elected, will you vote to protect that right as it currently exists?
I absolutely am a stalwart for a woman's right to choose. Earlier this year, at the County Board of Legislators passed a landmark clinic access bill that was 10 years in the works and was blocked by Republican legislators and a Republican county executive. But in an era with clinic invasions, which is what's been happening in White Plains and the Bronx, we need a stronger clinic access law in Albany. We also need to make sure that Roe versus Wade is codified, not just in statute, but also as a constitutional amendment. And I will do whatever I can with my vote and my bully pulpit to make sure that that happens. We also need to make sure that it's not enough to say you have a right in the books. We need to make sure that our healthcare providers, especially in less populated parts of the state, are actually providing the full range of reproductive services, which includes birth control and abortion. If we do these things, we can actually protect the women of this state. And I know that many of my friends and neighbors are working hard to help women from other states who are being oppressed by their government to come here and get the reproductive health care they need. I am also willing to work with all of them to make sure that those services are being offered to out-of-state women and that our people will not suffer any adverse consequences by their state's overreach.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. Mr. Valenti, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I think I got it. Thank you. Abortion, absolutely a hot topic issue. Abortion has been legal in New York State since 1970. It's been reiterated in 2019. Albany passed a bill allowing abortions up until including birth. I personally, I'm pro-life. We should focus on the care of the mother. We should focus on education. There are many aspects of abortion that are nuanced, and we need to have a conversation about it. Obviously, there are cases that are exceptions, rape, incest, and if the mother's life is in danger. But I feel it's a conversation we must have. And the issue about being pro-choice, there are many choices out there. There's choices of adoption. There's choices of abstinence. There's choices of motherhood. There's nothing like holding a baby in your arms once they're born. I remember both of my kids' birth, and the love that you feel for that child is something that cannot be measured.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Valenti. What steps will you take to cut taxes and trim the budget so that seniors who are living on a fixed income can still live in their homes, especially in view of inflation and the shrinking savings and investments right now?
Well, one thing that we face is a budget that's upside down in Albany. We're paying for stadiums for billionaires upstate. We're overtaxed heavily. And what we need to do is attract business, innovative business, new technology to New York State. Now, I know we just had a Micron deal upstate New York, but if you look at the numbers, the amount that we're spending to bring the business in is costing us dearly. So it doesn't make sense to spend more than you're going to make. We have and we can encourage new technology to come to New York State. We have the people who need to work. And if we invite the private sector in and we make good deals, unlike what's been happening in Albany, we can make it happen.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky, same question.
Okay. The biggest tax problem for senior citizens and for many other people who find themselves on fixed income or reduced incomes these days is the property tax. One of the big draws for New York State, and this is what keeps so much of our economy going, is people are attracted here by the quality of many of our school systems. We cannot say, okay, we're just going to turn our school system into what Florida is or what Arizona is, you know, kind of like a public hospital version of schools where children are barely getting any education at all. We need a good education system. But what we need to do is realize, and I'm a PhD in history, so I know that today's school system is not the one-room schoolhouse with the woman you can pay next to nothing at all to make it run. We have to find, because our school system is not what school systems used to be when we came up with the property tax to pay for them. We have to look at changing the tax structure so that our senior citizens and others can stay in their homes, and that the people who are most able to afford to pay, and quite frankly, have great jobs where they're benefiting from our education system, are help pay more of their fair share toward it. I know there are various groups in Albany who are studying how to write the property tax versus income tax and other tax burdens.
Thank you. Thank you. I
And
have
we
to,
should
I have
do
to
that.
hold you. Thanks, Ms. Shimsky. And now the next question starts with you again. Do you support the Clean Water, Clean Air, Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act? And why or why not?
Yes. Our infrastructure is suffering greatly from the increased effects of climate change. Our businesses and our homes are coming more at risk. We need flood mitigation. We also need, as it turns out, we need clean water. So many of our pipes are leaking sewage into our ecosystems. Some of our pipes are still lead pipes, which is endangering the futures of our children. We also have issues in many parts of the states with our wastewater treatment system. We also have issues with climate change. We need to do better to move toward that carbon-free future, to move toward a stormwater management system and a reintroduced natural ecosystem to make sure that we can withstand the storms that are going to come. That's why I believe we need the Environmental Bond Act. And all of these billions of dollars will help spur the kind of innovation which will make New York a leader in how to design proper environmentally sound cities, as well as moving us to the next century of energy use. We move forward on that, and before you know it, New York will be even more vibrant than it is now, and our people will be safer. So yes, we need the Environmental Bond Act.
Thank you, and I apologize. I thought you had finished. Mr. Valente, same question?
Yes. When there's a bill proposed, a referendum bond about clean air and water, who's going to say no? Obviously, we all want clean air and water. But we also have to follow through and make sure that what the money is money is allocated for is actually being used for. Talk about green energy and renewable energy. The best way to stay in the positive is to do the job right and to build it using quality products. If we use substandard products with our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, and our infrastructure in general, and we're going to repair them 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, we're not using the right technology. We're not using the right items. That's how you stay green. The term reduce, reuse, recycle, the first word in that is reduce. So if we reduce our waste, our spending, what has happened in Albany, crumbling infrastructure, of course I'm all for it. But at the same time, it needs to be followed through and followed upon.
Thank you very much. Next question to you again, Mr. Valente. What measures do you believe are most important to protect homes, businesses, and infrastructure? This sort of follows from the last one, from extreme weather and floods.
Well, just to continue the conversation, the right materials. I have a background in construction, and there is a habit of going to the least bidder. The correct way is going to the least responsible bidder. So if we do our job right in Albany, and if elected, it's one of the items that needs to be followed through, is when money is allocated, set aside for certain projects, there's always an excuse of why the budget is gone billions past of what it should be and what it was allocated for. Quality products are not used. And it goes all the way back into history. For example, the Brooklyn Bridge, the steel that's being used there, they supplied one measurement of steel and they used the substandard steel. So what's happened in New York State, and it's just a lack of oversight, using substandard products, having substandard representatives in Albany, having substandard follow-throughs. That's the problem that's been happening. And it will continue if we just continuously vote in career politicians.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shimsky, same question.
First thing we need to do to protect our homes and businesses is protect our homes and businesses. Resiliency from flooding and extreme wind and weather events are going to have to be written into our building codes. There is currently legislation that's been pending this term in Albany to move in that direction. What does that mean? It means building systems need to be moved out of the basement. It means that we need the proper materials. It means that certain places are just going to have to be altered in terms of topography and so on to be safe to build on. The other thing we have to do is we know as a long-term proposition, these are only going to get worse if we don't reduce our carbon footprints. New York has done so much to pioneer the study that can result in passive buildings, which means they're essentially net zero energy consumers. We can do this. We can do energy conservation. We can do recycling of various materials. And in fact, one of the things I hope to do if I'm on the transportation committee is talk with DOT about setting up the right regulations to make sure we're using the proper materials and recycled materials in so many of our construction projects.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, Ms. Shimsky. Has
Okay.
bail reform been a success or a failure? If you believe it was a success, please explain why. And if you think it's a failure and or that it should be scaled back or even repealed, please let us know why.
I think it's been a mixed bag. As I said, New York actually has an enviably low rate on homicides, which tells you something about where we are in crime compared to the rest of the country. But obviously one murder is one murder too many. But we have certain choices. Are we going to lock up everyone charged with a crime until they go to trial? If the answer is no, and boy, you want to talk about budget busters, we're going to have to figure out which people are safe to let out, which people are not safe to let out, which ones will return and which ones will not. Money is actually a very blunt instrument. Cash bail is a blunt instrument to determine whether people, especially those charged with less serious crimes, are going to commit more crimes or are going to not show up. My favorite story, outside of Jacksonville, Florida last week. Two guys shoot each other up in a road rage incident. Each one shoots their other's daughters. We're lucky. The worst thing that happened was a collapsed lung, believe it or not, saying that's lucky. But you know what? The end of the story said both those guys are out on bail. This is what a cash bail system does. It does not protect society. So
Thank you.
if we need changes in the current system, we can adjust, but we cannot repeal.
Thank you. Mr. Valente, same question, or would you like me to repeat it?
No, it's okay. Cashless bail, one of the biggest debacles that Albany and the Democrats have ever passed. Case in point, we had Lee Zeldin attacked and at his first stop earlier this year, and the man was released within hours. Subway crime, pushing, assaults, murders, 2 cops killed. It's abhorrent. Latest numbers are 40% of those that are arrested are released. Those that are released are rearrested again for additional felony crimes. And it's across the board. And it's not just New York City, it's in Westchester County also. We have stolen vehicles. We have mom and pop shops that are being run. We have chain stores that are closing their doors because anyone's coming in, smash and grab, fill up a bag and go. The numbers aren't down. The crime is up. The reason why they say the numbers are down is because they're not counting. And if you cherry pick the crimes that you want to count, that's how you can make the numbers go down. But it needs to be repealed. We need to give judges the right to sentence those and to hold those on bail, because we don't want to walk down the street looking over our shoulders, worrying if there's a hatchet coming at us or someone is going to attack us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Valente.
I would like to use rebuttal time.
Go right ahead.
Okay. The crime reduction statistics I cite are based on the same FBI methodology that's been used for decades. Crime is down in Westchester County, but we have two problems, and they're not directly tied to bail reform. One is the Supreme Court is trying to put guns everywhere on our streets. And the more guns in a jurisdiction, the more death. It's a plain correlation, whether you do it country to country or state to state. Second,
Thank you very much.
more mental health.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ms. Shimsky.
Okay.
If I may,
Yes.
okay,
Yes, you may.
okay. Not every jurisdiction reports their crimes to the FBI. Again, the numbers are in. Everyone could read the headlines. Everyone could walk into their corner store. Everyone could walk down to New York City, and the DAs choose not to prosecute those that are committing these crimes. So much so, Albany has actually lead towards the prisoners where they refuse, and they passed the bill refusing to use the word inmates. So ask yourself, are we the citizens' priority or are the inmates' priority?
Thank you very much. On the same subject of crime, Mr. Valente, given recent court decisions, I think this reflects Supreme Court decisions restricting New York's ability to protect people from gun violence. What do you see as the path forward on gun safety?
Well, education is always the path forward. Crimes that are being committed with guns are not being committed by law-abiding citizens. They're being committed by criminals. Criminals don't care about gun laws. I'll give you a scenario. A woman is attacked by a man. The great equalizer is a well-trained, lawful gun owner. We have a Second Amendment, and it's protected, and it's no less important than the First Amendment. So if we're going to continue to restrict our rights, no matter what they be, the right to assemble, the right to speak, the right to own a gun, and by the way, it was found unconstitutional. And again, Albany again restricts your right to own firearms. And again, it's probably going to fail again when it gets challenged. But think about this. They keep pulling your rights away one at a time, bit by bit, thinking you're not going to notice. But if you don't have a right to defend yourself, do you actually have the right to freedom of speech? Do you have the right to freedom of assembly? Words are just as important. And I think Albany just wants to keep control because they find it necessary to have armed guards for themselves. Many of them in Albany are licensed carrying gun holders. So again, is it a two-class social society that they want to create where they're better than the citizens of New York?
Thank you, Mr. Valente.
Justice Breyer's dissent in that case pointed out a number of glaring problems, complete misanalysis of history, and second of all, took public safety, compelling state interests in protecting the lives of people out of that state. People may have a right to carry guns, but it has to be tempered by the right of other people not to get shot. You can talk about training all you want. Innocent bystanders get shot all the time. Look at those poor two girls in that Jacksonville suburb. That happens all the time. And that is why homicide rates are so much higher in states that have loose gun laws. The reason why we have low rates is because of our gun laws. We have to keep working on the best combination we can to make sure that our public places and the people in them are safe from gun violence, from people exercising their Second Amendment rights, as well as people committing crimes. The other thing we have to do is if Roe versus Wade can be overturned after 50 years because it was not grounded enough, well, you know what? A really bad opinion by Clarence Thomas can be overturned in several years as well. I look forward to a new Supreme Court that will care about the lives of our citizens and allow us to care for the lives of our citizens, at least as much as gun owners' rights are concerned.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Shimsky, if you could prioritize one piece of election reform in New York State, what would it be?
I think my favorite is the no excuse absentee ballot. We've seen situations over the years where, if you were not able to check a particular box, your ballot was invalidated. Of course, depending on what happens with ideologically charged prosecutors' offices, that also opens up the possibility for election fraud prosecutions. We should allow people to vote where they are when it's convenient for them and they can make thoughtful decisions. Many states, including Utah, which is probably it's definitely one of the 3 to 5 reddest states in the United States, has actually had all mail-in voting for years and years. There's never been a problem. We could still have in-person voting, but we should make it easier for people to choose to vote where they are, which is why I believe that constitutional amendment to allow no excuse absentee voting should be reconsidered. And instead of just assuming it will pass and not having any follow through, we should talk with our fellow citizens and engage in conversation about what makes sense for them to make sure that more people vote. Because the object here is not to make voting a luxury that only certain people can do. Every qualified citizen should be able to vote.
Thank you. Mr. Valente, election reform?
Yes. So the no excuse absentee ballot, that was on the, was one of the referendums last year. And it was voted down by the citizens of New York. And again, Democrats in Albany took it upon themselves to say, we don't want to listen to the citizens of New York, so we're going to pass it. And they did. And so what the best thing that we can do to secure and to make it easier for our voting public is voter ID, which over 80% of all citizens agree upon, and having open primaries to independents and unaffiliated, because you give them the choice. You let them know, you let them vote, because New York has a closed primary, again, keeping a stronghold on the public. They have a closed primary system. We leave it open and we have an election day. We can have early voting. I don't care. That's fine. And we have absentee ballot. Again, we're the only first world nation that does not have voter ID. And everyone has an ID. New York makes it free. Anyone could get one. And the accessibility is there for everyone. So open primaries and voter ID.
Thank you. On the subject of public health, Mr. Valente, polio is now active in the Hudson Valley. Will you advocate for polio vaccination and enforcement that will again prevent death and disability?
Well, I've had my polio shot. I'm pro-vaccine. It took 5 years from inception to an actual vaccine to come to the public, and we eradicated it. It takes results and testing to show that it actually works. I'm not for mandates or unconstitutional edicts to force upon the public of what to do. We're our own citizens. We're responsible to take actions for ourselves. If I take a vaccine, I'm protected. I have nothing to worry about. What I believe is give all the information to the public. Let them know exactly what's happening. An informed public is going to make the right decision. We don't need government and Albany to tell the public what to do in any aspect. The public will do the right thing given the right information.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
Vaccine mandates were what made polio and other diseases go away. Measles has already been coming back, and now polio is coming back too. We have to enforce our vaccine mandates, because one thing my opponent said, which actually is factually inaccurate, is if enough people don't get vaccinated, eventually people who are vaccinated will catch some of these diseases. And we will end up in a descending spiral where basically we'll go back to Victorian times, and children will be crippled or worse on a regular basis, all because there are choices out there that people make which endanger them and the other children around them. And so much of that is based on misinformation on the internet. We have to fight the internet. We have to fight it with information, but we also have to enforce the laws that are on the books. Either law and order is either for everybody or it's for nobody. And as I said, the fewer children who get vaccinated because people are reading things generated by Russian bots or by left-wing, half-informed people on the internet means that our ability to protect ourselves against these diseases is going to be seriously compromised for the children who are vaccinated as well as not.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky.
If I may,
Yes, go ahead.
okay.
This is your
So-
second rebuttal, Mr. Valente?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have faith in New Yorkers, again, if they make the right decision for themselves, between themselves and a doctor, because if you don't have body autonomy, then we've lost ourselves as a society. New York, federal government wants to tell us how to live and what to live. We live in a free society. We're a constitutional republic. We're not a socialist society. We don't have to live under the thumb of an authority. Without us, government doesn't exist.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Valente. Ms. Shimsky, New York has a strong record of ensuring the rights of people with disabilities. How would you support this work? And is there more that needs to be done in this area?
Sorry.
Oh, you're on mute again. You muted yourself.
Okay, there, all right?
Yes.
Okay. We definitely need to do more for people with disabilities, physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, school age and adults. People who have relatively mild disabilities and people who are severely disabled. We've recently made some progress on issues concerning housing for adults, but there's so much more that needs to be done with that. I know there are a lot of concerns that parents with severely disabled children who are in institutionalized housing have about their safety and their ability to function properly in those settings. I am willing to work with those groups to develop the appropriate legislation to help protect those folks as well. We have to take care of each other. We don't get the right to say, well, I want to do what I want and that's it. For example, going back to, I just want to go back and say, we do not have the right to harm others, and we do have the obligation to help others, which means we get vaccinated, we don't carry guns irresponsibly, and we make sure that all members of the disabled community have the opportunity to live their best lives in our state.
Thank you. Mr. Valente?
So my brother, my younger brother, was disabled. He passed away 2 years ago, and nothing made him feel more alive than to be a part of society and work. And us, his family, were his biggest advocate. My mom would do anything and everything for him. So there are programs out there, but they need to be expanded upon. Depending on your level of disability, you could be part of the general workforce. The thing is, we just need to think outside of the box. I was witness to it. I was a part of it. I've been in situations where we've had disabled, physically disabled individuals working in a garage. There's paperwork that needs to be done. Shipping circumstances, we're filling in orders. We have a society that doesn't treat them like second-class citizens, but can treat them better. I was in that world, and those faces that you see working, feeling that you're part of making a change, there's nothing like it. So absolutely, New York can do more and needs to do more.
Thank you. Mr. Valente, what is your view on government's role in ensuring the affordability of housing in New York State?
I think it needs to be a combination, and it is to a certain extent where we have a public and private sector. We can introduce an efficient way of building to keep our taxes low, and to create all types of housing. Right now, we have inflation that is through the roof, that is killing the middle class. And your basic 1,500, 1,800, 2,000 square foot home is a struggle. People living paycheck to paycheck. So what's happening right now with the overspending, the unchecked rules that is going on in Albany, it has to end. We need more oversight and innovative ideas, new ways of building, efficient ways of building. We actually have construction using shipping containers. They're seaworthy. It's become a fad that I've been a fan of for about 10 plus years now. And they're sustainable homes. It can be done, and it just needs to be done. Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
This state for decades has been engaging in what might be loosely at least called public-private partnerships to build more affordable housing and more housing that is affordable. They're two different things for people throughout the state. Problem is, the problem keeps growing. And like I said, it's the curse of living in a place where everyone wants to be. My younger child went to school in Los Angeles. I've seen what happens and where we are headed next, where people with decent middle-class incomes may end up living in tents. Now, there's one problem. You cannot live in a tent in New York in January. One of the big issues we face as a county within New York is people in Albany think of Westchester County as an affluent, leafy suburb like the Dick Van Dyke Show updated. They don't see all of the people who cannot afford their housing or who are barely holding on. Based on information we get from not-for-profit groups in Westchester County, my guess is well over 2/3 of Westchester County residents have a hard time affording their housing. We have to work together with New York City. There are innovative ideas that people are seeking to implement down there. We have to make sure that Westchester becomes part of that conversation and our people are not left behind.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shimsky, as we move towards electric vehicles, how will the lost revenue from gasoline tax be made up? Or does it need to be made up to fund the Department of Transportation or other uses?
At some point, we are going to have to figure out how to, we are going to have to figure out that piece because roads don't repair themselves. And based on all of the construction techniques that are used in this part of the country, roads are not going to last more than 25, 30 years, maybe. So we're going to need to continue to have robust, well, we're going to need robust road repair programs. I can go on about how we need to do better in Albany to make sure our local governments have the resources they need and that the state is making the investments they need. But we are going to have to find new ways to pay for pay for road repair. I had an interesting conversation with my son, who does not own a car and lives in a city several states away, and talks about why should everybody pay for roads? Well, everybody should pay for roads because even if you're not traveling on them, that's how the goods at your supermarket get there. And that's how the people who play at the music venues you go to get there. Roads are a common good and people cannot survive without them. That is a piece that we are going to have to figure out.
Thank you. Mr. Valente?
Could you reread the question, please?
Sure. As we move towards electric vehicles, how will the lost revenue from the gasoline tax be made up? Or does it need to be made up to fund the state's Department of Transportation or other uses?
So that's a funny question. So we have terrible roads right now. Anyone who's hit a pothole knows. Bridges, roads, tunnels, crumbling infrastructure. And at the same time, we're moving towards electric vehicles, or are we being forced to move towards electric vehicles? By the way, I love electric vehicles. I think they're great. I don't think the government should force the market. I think the buying public should dictate the market. So if we have a crumbling infrastructure right now and we're paying the taxes and the government is forcing us to choose and buy, to be a consumer, we have a problem to begin with. We could be energy independent. I know my opponent touched upon it earlier. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, they don't dictate the market. We can dictate the market. We have untapped resources. Just a few years ago, a gallon of gas was $2. Now we're paying $5. The national average, I think, is $4 and change. So instead of forcing higher taxes in New York, how about let the market dictate? And that's how it self-corrects itself.
Thank you very much. Finally, our last question for the evening, Mr. Valente, what new thinking would you bring to the table regarding the state's role in funding education?
Well, I think there's power in education. Everybody deserves an opportunity, and we are lucky in New York to have a great education system. But at the same time, we need to quell wasteful spending. We need to use the right materials. We need to use the long-lasting materials so our money goes further. The wasteful spending that's happening in Albany and that trickles down to our district, we feel it in our pocket. Also, the current formula being used, where we get our money back from the state, is upside down. We're paying more to the state and we're receiving less for our education. So that needs to be reworked as well. And again, this has been happening for decades. And it's funny how the ruling power says they're going to make a change all the time. And we, the citizens, continuously tell them, well, you have the stronghold, make the change, but they're never going to. Put in citizen candidates in Albany. Vote your next door neighbor. Don't vote the politician that's running from one office to another.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shimsky?
One of the reasons why money goes to other school districts is because of a court decision that we are under order to make sure that children who live in poor neighborhoods also have decent schools that meet certain minimum standards. That being said, there's a lot wrong with the formulas at this point that don't work for many of the school districts in our district. We have 3 different kinds of school districts with 3 different kinds of problems. One are the good suburban, largely residential school districts that have great schools, but people are really getting hammered with property taxes. We need to restructure the tax funding for public schools so that it's not so dependent on property taxes. The second one are places like Greenberg Central 7 and Elmsford, and to some extent the Tarry towns, where there are relatively large numbers of English language learners, free and reduced lunch qualifying students. But they're not adequately represented in the formulas that determine aid for those school districts. We need to change that. The third piece is Yonkers, because now we're going to represent a part of Yonkers. And we've seen what has happened to the Yonkers schools over the years. You have very low property taxes, but you don't want to send your kids there in many cases, at least after 8th grade. We need to make sure all of our public schools work and are the pride of everyone in all of our communities.
Thank you very much. This concludes our question and answer session. So we're going to move into closing statements, and Ms. Shimsky will go first.
Thank you very much to everyone who worked so hard to make this evening a success. I'm watching the ASL interpreter. You and the closed captioners are the unsung heroes here tonight. We have a lot of problems that we're dealing with, many of which were either caused by COVID or accelerated by COVID. Many of them we talked about tonight, some of them like community mental health, which is a huge problem, especially when you're talking about trying to deal with crime and gun violence, is another one that we have to deal with. We have a really good set of democratic values, a good government. But what we need to do is make sure that we make ourselves independent of inflationary forces like OPEC and Russia. We need to make sure that we're ready for the next pandemic now so people don't die while we're still wondering, well, should we wear a mask or not? We have responsibilities to each other as well as to ourselves. And
Thank you.
we need a
Thank
good
you.
government that takes care of that.
Thank you. Mr. Valente?
Again, thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting on this debate. Albany needs to change. New York needs to change. We cannot afford to live in fear. We cannot afford to be pushed out due to high costs. We cannot afford to live under the rules of unchecked power. And it's been going on for over a decade. These past 2 years have shown how drunk with power Albany is. If you can't see that, I don't know what can. They created a two-class society, rules for thee and not for me. They have disenfranchised the voting public through executive orders, unchecked power, and abuse. So I ask you, this election day, vote them all out. Vote out the career politicians, vote out the ones who jump from one political office to another. Tell Albany we, the public, hold the power. I am Carlo Valente, and I thank you.
5 seconds.
You are entitled to another. No, I'm trying to check the rules on rebuttals for.
It's in your discretion. I just want 5 seconds.
I'll grant you 5 seconds because you didn't have a second rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Experience is not a bad thing, and that's what we're going to need to move the state forward.
Thank you very much. Okay, so to wrap up, please note that Election Day this year is Tuesday, November 8th. Early voting will begin on October 29th and will conclude on November 6th. If you want to vote absentee, if you're requesting the ballot be sent by mail, you must do so by October 24th, meaning if you are requesting it by mail, have to do it by October 24th. If you're going to go actually into a voting office and request the absentee ballot in person, that has to be done by November 7th. To find your polling location, a list of the candidates and ballot proposals, and for all other questions concerning voting, please visit vote411.org. Finally, thank you to, as was already said, our league helpers, including the timekeeper, the technician, the translators, and to conclude, not an original thought at all, but democracy is not a spectator sport. We encourage everyone to get out there and vote. Thank you very much. Have a good night.